If you've been following the channel at all for the past 2 weeks or so, you'll see that I finished up my playthrough of Resident Evil 8 on PSVR2. This game truly blew away all the expectations that I had for it, which were very high in the first place, and may have cemented itself as my VR game of the year. But today, we're going to go through and talk about it. I know I'm very late to the party here, but I think it's the perfect time to talk about it in a way because we're leading up a week from now-ish to the launch of Resident Evil 4 on PSVR2, which could stand a very good chance from what I hear of beating Resi 8 in terms of the VR port department. But for now, let's dive into what I thought of Resident Evil 8 on PSVR2, some amazing features it had, some of the best moments it had, and also some of the caveats that it brought with it throughout its 8 or so hour runtime. First of all, we need to talk visuals, graphics, and in clarity. This is hands down one of the best looking PSVR2 games. There's no two ways about it, even with reprojection because it runs at 60Hz reprojected to 120. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's a sight to behold in the headset, and each section of the game up the ante in terms of visuals as you head on through the game. Seeing the castle for the first time, the village for the first time, and the opening segments in the forest absolutely blew me away, and the game upped the ante each time it brought me into a new segment. The only game that's on parallel to this for me on PSVR2 is Horizon Call of the Mountain, or Red Matter 2 maybe, and the only game on other platforms that I can really think of that comes to mind is Half-Life Alyx. Resi 8, as I said, is truly a sight to behold, and it's not just in the visual presentation either. While the textures look amazing, you can only get so far with that, and it's really in the animations where Resi 8 shines. One area I need to highlight is facial animations. When speaking to other characters, they look absolutely unreal. I had this moment when I first played Half-Life Alyx when I was being spoken to, where I completely lost myself in the image I was being shown. I completely forgot that I was in a game because the faces looked that real, and I had that moment so many times in Resi 8. It was similar in Horizon Call of the Mountain too. These facial models are absolutely ridiculous, and the animations to go with them just blow me away every time I see them. If this same clarity is brought forward with Resi 4 as well, that's going to be absolutely ridiculous, but we'll get into that a little bit later. As I said, spectacle was a big thing for me in this game. I was constantly blown away, and I think you can probably count the number of times I said wow in that playthrough, and it would take you a fair amount of time because I was blown away by so much. From the first sight of the castle, to the first sight of Moreau, to the Beneviento house segment, to the factory, to the level where you play as Chris, and to the final boss, the game does not let up with the spectacle that it shows you, and it's absolutely incredible to play through. Especially for me, somebody who's going in blind, it's just ridiculous that a game that shows off this much in terms of visuals even exists. It's absolutely ridiculous. But all this spectacle doesn't mean anything if there's no story to go with it, and luckily, the story's pretty good. I'm a little bit torn about this because each level I found really compelling on its own. I found myself invested in the factory, in Moreau's reservoir, in House Beneviento, and in the castle, and even in the final battle, but I don't feel like they merged together that perfectly. I did feel like there was a bit of a disconnect, not really tonally or in terms of setting, because it is quite consistent in that department, but I feel like the characters could have been linked together a little bit better. You see them interact in one scene all together, and then after that, they make passing mentions of each other, but it would have been cool to see them really interact a little bit more. However, that's the biggest of my complaints, and it's a really small one in terms of story. The rest of it kept me hooked all the way through, and I'm actually just surprised that something like this has ever come to PSVR2. A full Resident Evil game, playable from start to finish, where you can experience the story at a new level of immersion, and I'm just thankful for that. So to be honest, my caveats with the story being segmented and not merging perfectly together isn't really a big worry at all. But first and foremost, Resi 8 is a horror game. Does it do well in that department? Well, if you see my series, you know that I screamed a lot, and that probably tells you the answer. Yes, the scares are amazing, especially at the start of the game, but they do drop off towards the end, although I really didn't mind that. The game, once you get comfortable in its setting, switches to a more action-oriented experience, and I think that's actually a good thing. If the game was trying to conjure up the same feeling that you got in House Beneviento all the way through, I do think I would have gotten a bit tired of it, and it would have got a bit old. I'm glad that they took the leap to transform it into a more, action-focused experience, especially in the Chris level, because it made that last level even more memorable than it would have been if it was just another stealth-oriented or scare-oriented segment. That being said though, the scares in the game were pretty amazing, especially during the starting levels and of course during the baby level. That segment lives rent-free in my head, and it's probably the most panicked I've ever been publicly in a video on this channel, so if you missed that one, you should go check it out. We gotta talk about the length of the game as well, and I think it was pretty solid, to be honest. The AAA experience of Resident 8 can be speedrun through very quickly, but for an average playthrough it's probably around 7 to 8 hours. I know it was around 7.5 hours to 8 hours for me, and that's an incredibly good length for a VR game. I didn't feel like it dragged at all, which is the main thing. If the game drags, I'm gonna lose interest very quickly, and I'm very glad that it didn't. It allowed me to have a series focused on it, but it didn't make me feel like I was getting tired of the experience at any point. From what I hear, Vertigo 2 and Resi 8 are similar, if not a little bit longer, so I'm very excited to play through those on the channel too. And Horizon Call the Mountain sat at about the same runtime as well, and I feel like that's really the sweet spot, at least for me, in terms of VR experiences in a linear story. So overall, I was really happy with the length of the game. In terms of actual VR features, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I'm not really obsessed about it whatsoever. The task of porting a game like this to VR at all is monumental, and I didn't expect the character, you, to be able to interact with the entire world, and that indeed is the case. You can smash some items, you can pick up some things, but most of the time the world is a static backdrop for what you're doing, aside from opening doors and interacting with, the story items that you need to interact with to progress. However, I think they made up for this by having the interactions with your character, Ethan, be so in depth. Instead of pressing a button to switch weapon or to pull out an item, you physically do that with your coat pockets. Sure, you go into the menus to decide which items go where in your coat, but once you put them there, you open those coat pockets and you bring out, say, your torch or a pipe bomb or a mine, and that really makes you feel immersed as Ethan, because one of his signature clothing items is incorporated so well into the actual mechanics of the game, and I think that's pretty awesome. So even though the world may lack some VR features that I would have loved to have seen with interaction with different items, the VR interactions with the character Ethan really make up for it in my opinion. However, I do have to finally mention one of my least favourite things about the game, which was the amount of flat cutscenes, especially towards the end. There were several moments in those ending scenes that played out in flat cutscenes that could have been VR cutscenes like the ones at the start of the game and in the midpoints of the game, where you're actually attached to Ethan's head while the cutscene plays out. And while I was slightly disappointed that some of the cutscenes towards the end were flat, there were plenty that were in that Ethan POV, so I really can't be too mad about it. I just hope that when Resi 4 comes out, they somehow get around the fact that most of the cutscenes in that game apparently are in third person from what I hear, so hopefully we don't get a load of flat cutscenes in that experience. But Resi 8 was a mix of both, and to be honest, it didn't pull me out the experience as much as this is really implying it did. It was just something that would have been nice to have if none of the cutscenes were flat, but that's just how it is, and I enjoyed the experience nonetheless. So to answer the question at the start of this video, is Resi 8 my VR game of the year? At the moment, yes. I would say it's very close between this and Horizon, but it may just be recency bias, but Resi 8 has really pushed a little bit past Horizon. I really felt a lot more emotional at the end of Resi 8, and I felt a lot more invested than I did with Horizon's story. Horizon's a game that I come back to quite a lot to revisit some levels because it's the first PSVR2 game that I've tried and played through fully. I always get feelings of nostalgia for the release, even though it's only been, 8 months, of PSVR2, from jumping back into Horizon, and I absolutely adore it on a visual level. I've had a couple of videos detailing my favourite spots in that game that really make me feel like I'm at home in that world, but Resi 8 from start to finish was a completely different feeling experience altogether. And it's one that blew me away consistently. It's really hard to stack these two against each other, and I think if I played through Horizon start to finish again, I might feel like I'd be inclined to go with Horizon again, but at the moment it's definitely Resi 8. Now it might not stay that way though, because we've got Resi 4 coming out next week, and then we have Vertigo 2 coming out the week after that, so we have a very busy time for PSVR 2 in terms of releases, and I'm really excited to get stuck in there and try out these games and see if they can knock Resi 8 off the top of my rankings. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and thank you all for following my playthrough of Resident Evil 8 if you did. If you haven't watched through it and you've just seen this review, I'll leave a link to the playlist with all those videos down below. So thank you all for watching once again, and I hope to see you all in the next video.